Hello, my name is Russ Cordova. Thank you for joining me for this presentation today. I'm excited to jump right in, so let's go ahead and do that. This is a reflection on personal and social ethics from Block 3 of the summer semester 2017. The first verse that I picked is, "You shall not have in your bag differing weights, a large and a small." This is from Deuteronomy 25:13. And it's basically, in a simple sentence, warning us against dishonesty and deception. This class shed a lot of light on capital punishment for me. It talked in the Ray text. It talked a lot about the abolitionist view versus the retentionist view, the morality of it, discrimination, and really it comes down to, is it really justice? So the question of who's right or wrong is not the question I think we should be concerned with. From my perspective, the questions we need answering are: does God approve? Does the punishment fit the crime? Is it being delegated fairly? And Ray points out the abolitionists claim that the demand for justice is inconsistent with Jesus' ethic of forgiveness and redemption. Retentionists usually lean on Old Testament, not exclusively, of course, citing passages like Exodus 21:12 that says, "He that smiteth a man so that he die shall be surely put to death." Of course, that's a life-for-life principle, right? According to the ACLU, the color of a defendant's and victim's skin plays a crucial and unacceptable role in deciding who receives the death penalty in America. People of color have accounted for a disproportionate 43% of total executions since 1976, and 55% of those currently awaiting execution. That's just crazy in my mind. While my position on this and how I make ethical decisions are rooted in divine command theory, I'm really undecided in this issue. It's really hard for me to say one way or another. So I think, as Scott Ray puts it, I would be a procedural abolitionist at this point. With regards to my ethical system as a whole, I do concur with Evans, who points out that God is essentially morally good, and as such, no obligation is needed to guarantee the content of his promise making or actions. There's a reference at the end of this presentation if you'd like to explore that text further. So, being a firm believer in having a personal relationship with the Lord, I consult with him when I'm unsure or have any reservation on which way to steer in a situation. So the next passage that I'd like to share with you is from Romans 1:26 through 2:1. I'll leave that up for you to read. But in this passage from the book of Romans, we're exposed to the dark side of humanity. We see man at its worst, turning his back on God, giving in to the calls of the flesh, and committing all kinds of grotesque sin. This is an example of the consequences of operating unethically and or making decisions to do things that we know are wrong. Ultimately, compromising our values, even in the small things, leads to behaviors that become part of our character, and before you know it, we're excusing away sins that we never imagined we would be committing. I think in at least a small way, all of us can relate to that at least somewhat. So the next topic I'd like to explore is reproductive technologies. I gained a lot of insight on this as well, especially around ICSI and GIFT. I was especially excited to know that there was a donor sibling registry created by Wendy Kramer and her son. They're actually folks from Colorado, where I live, and they're from Nederland, which is out by Boulder. And they built this for mutual consent contact between people born from anonymous sperm or egg donation. Pretty awesome stuff. ICSI, or intracytoplasmic sperm injection, is a process that's more expensive than others. Basically, it's injecting a single sperm into an egg. GIFT, or gamma intrafallopian transfer, is where a woman is given hormonal treatment, enables her to release multiple eggs in a single cycle. Eggs are removed by a minor surgical procedure and combined with the man's sperm and placed in the fallopian tubes. Now, there's a complex moral issue, as Scott Ray puts it, around this. If one believes that a embryo is alive, or human life basically begins at conception, then those leftover embryos, if they're discarded or used for science and for experimenting, then there's a whole lot of moral issues around that and conversation that has to be had. Lots of people who are against that happening. So that's a whole nother realm, and that's about as much as I'm going to say about that. But this leads directly into my case study because it's based on something that I actually had to face myself. So when it came up, I wasn't very educated on this, and there wasn't a whole lot of or I didn't know where to access the research around it, so I didn't really advise well. But a close relative comes to you in confidence and asks your advice on the direction he or she should go in order to fulfill a lifelong desire to have children. They and their partner have been trying to conceive for 3 years and have been unsuccessful, and they have strong spiritual convictions that have kept them from even considering reproductive technologies, but they haven't done any research. What do you do? Well, for me, whether I'm advising a believer or not, I remain true to my morals and values, and I'm always going to speak from a place of the Spirit, seeking to honor God in the conversation. So that being said, I would first ask them to pray. I would ask the couple if they've considered adoption, because there's a lot of kids out there and a lot of kids on their way to this world that are unaccounted for, that are at risk, and it's heartbreaking to think that they're going to have to endure a luck of the draw situation as to whether or not they'll have a family unit. Kids often feel, just not valued at all in those scenarios. I grew up with a lot of them, and it's just not cool. And I'd love to see more of them rescued. So, of course, I would talk to them about adoption, see if they've considered it, and if they're open to it, start by, really influencing them towards adoption. Then I would open the door and talk about intrauterine insemination, which is most cost efficient and probably one of the simplest procedures, which involves the male sperm being inserted into the woman's uterus artificially rather than through sexual intercourse. Regardless of the path chosen, I would encourage them to pray first and ask God for clarity on what they should do, not just rely on what I'm advising them. Next, I would talk to them about the gift transfer or gamma intrafallopian transfer, warning them of the possibility of leftover embryos, and advise them if they take this route and consider personhood beginning at conception, they may not want to go that way. Furthermore, if masturbation is an issue for them, they can attempt to obtain the sperm through normal sex, which is a bit more challenging in the collection process, but it can be done. Then I would discuss the more expensive option, which would be ICSI. In the interest of full disclosure, it's important to understand that this process opens up the possibility of inferior sperm reaching the egg and has a higher chance of miscarriage or birth defects. However, there's not enough data to determine that that's 100% reason to be concerned. So the issue I am undecided on is capital punishment. And these are the questions that I would need to be answered to really come to a final conclusion. Is it possible to regulate it? Since God gave authority, in some instances, is it okay to take a life for a life? Can we track and hold states accountable for administering and delegating the verdicts fairly? If there's a possibility of reform, should we allow the opportunity, any possibility, even the minute amount of possibility that this person could reform? And of course, how can we gauge the possibility of reform, even the slightest? The Bible says in Mark 7:20 through 23, and he said, whatever comes from the heart of a man, that is what defiles and dishonors him. For from within, that is, out of the heart of men, come base and malevolent thoughts and schemes, acts of sexual immorality, thefts, murders, adulteries, acts of greed and covetousness, wickedness, deceit, unrestrained conduct, envy and jealousy, slander and profanity, arrogance and self-righteousness and foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile and dishonor a man. Ultimately, I chose the Amplified Version because this accentuates the state of man's heart and gives us a glimpse of why we often take the broad path, ending up in a pool of sin and having to right our wrongs. So the next piece of insight I thought was great is the discussion in Book 4 about theology and is it important in the Christian life. Theology means the science of God, and I think any man who wants to think about God at all would like to have the clearest and most accurate ideas about him which are available. C.S. Lewis said that, and I couldn't agree more. Divine command theory or theological volunteerism depends on God's will. It is not the recognition of something being good because God recognizes it as good. It is reliant on God's will entirely. There is much controversy around its validity, even some saying that if one is to believe the will of God is the basis for morality, then he would command us to do things that are improper. That'll never happen with the God that I serve. And in the notes section, you'll see an alternative support for that view from Michael Austin. You can also check out the references page to read more about that. I hope you've enjoyed attending the presentation as much as I have enjoyed giving it. I gave you a front row seat to some of my learning and ethical understanding, as well as a roadmap of my adventure and spiritual growth. Have a wonderful rest of your year.